If we hope to try to redeem our American soul, we have a huge restorative justice debt to repay.
From 1850 until the end of the Civil War, Montgomery was the southern port most active in slave trading. And all over the city, there are markers that draw attention to where Rosa Parks boarded the bus and refused to give her seat up, to the Dexter Avenue Memorial Baptist Church where Martin Luther King Jr. was the pastor, and back again to the Legacy Museum's building where all those that were enslaved were waiting to be sold. So despite the progress I thought we had made as a people and a country, well, it's clear we haven't advanced very far at all. Race-based discrimination continues through our public policies today in more complex ways. And what I learned about was the thread and the symbiotic relationship that continues to weave itself from slavery to the 13th Amendment, to the Jim Crow laws, to lending discrimination, to the war on drugs and mass incarceration and immigration and the implicit racism that is still targeted against people of color.
Institutional racism is a cancer that has intertwined all the vital organs: housing, education, healthcare. Can it be excised?
While there has been substantial change in the years since the Civil Rights era, that change has served only to show how deep and systemic racism is in our country. It is our original sin.
I was moved by resilience, unfathomable resilience. In the face of all the suffering, trauma, and dehumanizing efforts that we saw clearly represented, the power of African Americans, both individually and corporately, could not be extinguished. No matter what we did, physically, spiritually, legally, economically, no matter the brutal efforts, they still prevailed. And that Black and brown and indigenous people continue to share gifts of their culture, spirituality, creativity, and political action. To improve a nation that methodically, purposefully, and continually oppresses them is an amazing thing for me to reflect on.
I started wondering if the whites' extreme hatred was actually fear and self-loathing for not only their own actions, but because the African Americans displayed moral and physical courage, enduring their situations to an extent of which the abusers knew they themselves were incapable.
I would offer what impacted me the most was crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. When all of those individuals, those courageous individuals, hit the apex of the bridge, to look down and see guards, to see armed guards, to see people on horseback, to see such a profound expression of hatred and brutality awaiting them. And yet they continued to walk, courageous and loving, knowing something has to change. As we walked and as the rain fell, I couldn't help but feel this was the collective tears of so many.
I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, I'm gonna do, oh Lord, I'm gonna do what the Spirit says do. I'm gonna sing when the Spirit says sing. I'm gonna sing when the Spirit says sing. When the Spirit says sing, I'm gonna sing, oh Lord, I'm gonna sing when the Spirit says sing. I'm gonna pray when the Spirit say pray. I'm gonna pray when the Spirit say pray.
There were two things that deeply impacted me on the journey to Alabama this spring. The first was the memorial to peace and justice, which showed how horrendous and pervasive lynching was in this country.
I was most touched by the thousands of named and unknown lynching victims honored at the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Mobile. It was just heartbreaking to realize the number of African American lives lost over the centuries to support a system of white supremacy.
I was overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude and the depravity of the abuse heaped on African Americans over the centuries. Maybe the most horrific exhibit for me was at the Memorial for Peace and Justice, where one of the lynchings recounted was of an African American man who had questioned some menial order of a white man. The response was not only the lynching of the man, but also of his elderly mother and of his 4- and 6-year-old daughters.
My hope is that we shall overcome soon And my question for the Presbytery is how?
I struggle with how to begin to talk to friends whom I've known and loved for decades who, even now, are ignorant, perhaps willfully ignorant, of the fact that they are so uninformed. And they stay in the mindset of, yeah, but, and blame the victim. Where do I begin?
I asked Heartland Presbytery to take up a challenge from Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. Will you be creative extremists to extend justice?
How will Heartland Presbytery lift up and support racial justice and equality from now on?
As a white woman of privilege, what is my role in this moment? How will you help me explore that?
Too many of the teaching and ruling elders report that they felt fellow Presbytery members did not want to hear their reports on racial and economic injustice and of the corrective actions that need to be taken. And what can we do to improve that?
How can the Heartland Presbytery be the change that we want to see?
How do we hear God calling this presbytery to respond in love and self-examination and vulnerability and courage to look at the ways in which our own insecurities and our own assumptions interfere with other people's abilities to live and to thrive?
What is needed to invite you to turn into and face this yourself? As individuals, as churches, as presbytery, even as a denomination. What will keep us from the lure of going back to sleep in comfort?